Dear David Harris, it is for all of these reasons that I feel it is for me an honor and a true privilege to promote you to the rank of officier de l'Ordre National de la Légion d'honneur. If you want now to come closer to me. David Harris, au nom du Président de la République et en vertu des pouvoirs qui nous sont conférés, nous vous faisons officier dans l'ordre de la Légion d'honneur.
Monsieur le Président Macron, cher ambassadeur Etienne, my friend Consul General Robert, my long-standing and dear friend François Delattre, who will speak a bit later, and Ambassador Jean-David Levit, who could not be here but is with us in spirit. I'm deeply touched by this occasion, and I thank you in particular, Philippe, for your extremely generous and warm words. It makes me all the sorrier that my late mother is not here, and I'll explain why later, but she would be perhaps the only person who actually believed everything you said. In one of my favorite French novels, Une Vie by Guy de Maupassant, the very last line of the novel, the very last line by the principal character, in English we would say Jean, in French Jean, she says memorably, La vie, voyez-vous, n'est jamais si beau ni si mauvais qu'on croit. Life, you see, is never as good or as bad as you may think. But I must say, Philippe, today life is good. And it's because of this ceremony, this occasion, that I will briefly contradict de Maupassant. The award is especially even emotional for me, because other than the country in which I was born, the United States, and the country to which I feel so metaphysically attached, Israel, there is no other country on the planet which has had a more profound impact on my life than France. France, for me, is several things. First, a destination. I first arrived in France, actually in Cherbourg, by boat, from this city, New York, just as I was turning 11 years old. My very first sight of France, my very first sight of Europe. We then went to Paris. My jaw dropped, and it never corrected itself from the impact of that initial impression. And since then, which was 60 years ago, I must have been to France 100 times. Now I have no idea. I've lived in France, I studied in Marseille, I've traveled the length and breadth of France, I've seen its beauty, its character, its charm, in countless ways. France for me, though, is not just a destination, though it is the world's, I think, foremost tourist destination year after year. France for me is an idea, a very powerful, compelling idea. The idea for me is rooted in les droits de l'homme, the rights of man and women, humanity. It's rooted for me in those three words, which are sometimes perhaps poorly understood: liberty, equality, fraternity. It's rooted for me in the 1905 adoption of legislation which not only separated church and state, which is essential both for the protection of state and the protection of religion, but France went a step further in adopting the notion of laïcité, which to this day, as we see, is still poorly understood in too many parts of the world. We understand it and we support it. It was not by accident, I believe, that a French legal scholar, and yes, a Jew, René Cassin, after the Second World War, was the principal drafter of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because it brought together the spirit of the French experiment in democracy, in the rights of man, together with the age-old Jewish tradition of the search for an ethical and moral map for humankind. And I also believe it was not by accident, in the spirit of French ideas, that Robert Schuman, the then Foreign Minister of France after the war, and Jean Monnet were charged with a difficult task: prevent future war in Europe. And today, many do not even realize that what has become the most ambitious and successful peace project in modern history, the European Union, emanated from French ideas after the Second World War. I can go on, but each of those ideas and so many more have animated me and helped me to be the person that I've tried to be during my lifetime. France for me is culture. I think my mother and my father had only one common language. It was French. The home I grew up in, just across this park on the west side of New York City, was a home in which I mostly heard French. The earliest lullaby I can still recall, and the one that not only did my mother sing to me, but she sang to her grandchildren, one of whom is here, another is on the screen, and her great-grandchildren, always with the hand motion, was "Ainsi font les petites marionnettes." This was the home I grew up in, literally just across the street, West 74th Street, a direct line. I grew up with having read, probably before anything else, Le Petit Prince, dozens of times, and then it was on to Molière, Corneille, and Racine, and Balzac, and de Maupassant, and Proust, and it just keeps going. And French philosophy, and French art, and French design, and French cuisine, and French chanson, and the city in which you live today in Washington, D.C., designed by Pierre L'Enfant. I only wish, Philippe, that he had designed more American cities. We would be a better country today, happy. It goes on. France for me is also geopolitics, which brings me to my work at the American Jewish Committee. I don't think it's well known, but I believe the very first trip that AJC leadership took after the founding in 1906 was a trip to Paris. And that was to attend and lobby at the Paris Peace Conference of 1919 to seek to protect minority rights in a post-war turbulent Europe. The very first office that the American Jewish Committee created outside the United States was also Paris, immediately after the Second World War, to try and help restore Jewish life in post-war Europe, in post-Holocaust Europe, and in the ensuing years to deal with the traumatic events of North Africa and the migration of Jews from North African countries, many to France, many to Israel. So whether we look to the United Nations and France's permanent seat on the Security Council, Whether we look to AJC's interests in the Middle East, where we see France every step of the way, whether we look to the JCPOA and the Iran deal, see France as a signatory, wherever we look, we see France and its important role. And when I look back nostalgically to the 1950s and 1960s when France was literally Israel's indispensable ally. And it raises questions whether Israel could even have survived had it not been for the essential role played by France in the first 2 decades of Israel's life. And then came a reassessment and a more complicated relationship, but nonetheless a very important relationship. And then, of course, there's the fact that France is the home to the 3rd largest Jewish community in the world, the largest in Europe, a community that, as you hinted, Philippe, has had its share of challenges the last 20 years in particular. Terror attacks, unfortunately some successful, others thwarted, high levels of security at Jewish institutions across the country, but a community that is proudly French and wants very much to see a future for itself. And then, of course, for AJC, we see France as a laboratory for the democratic encounter of the largest Jewish community in Europe and the largest Muslim population in Europe. Will this encounter succeed or not? It remains to be seen. You have a stake, we have a stake, the French ideal has a stake in ensuring the success of that encounter. And AJC will continue to be your partner in trying to ensure it. And finally, France is family. Literally, it's family for me makes this event so moving, and all the more reason why I wish in the empty chair my mother could sit. My mother was born in Moscow in 1923, and like many Russians, both Jewish and non-Jewish, including members of the Romanov family, they fled when they could, the promise of socialist paradise, and they were welcomed to Paris. My father fled Austria after the Anschluss in 1938 and also arrived in Paris. Enrico Macias had not yet, I think, been born, but certainly had not yet begun singing. But the words of one song in particular would have been appropriate, I think, for my mother and my father upon arrival in Paris. Toi, Paris, tu m'as pris dans tes bras. You, Paris, you took me in your arms. You embraced me in your arms. And it did. And other members of my family, too. In fact, I think we have some photographs. This one is of members of my mother's family from 4 generations, including my great-grandparents in Fontainebleau, we believe in 1931. And then a second photograph, which is of my young mother and her older brother, Yuli, who subsequently graduated from Lycée Janson de Sailly. And her parents, my maternal grandparents, who lived in the next apartment to us across the path. My father, Eric, was sent to the French Foreign Legion. You may recognize the uniform. He served in the Free France until he was arrested by Vichy as a sale juif, a dirty Jew. And he was imprisoned for 3 years in Knatza in western Algeria in a Vichy labor camp until his successful escape on his second attempt, and eventually joined the OSS, the American Espionage Service. Was sent behind enemy lines, and after the war was brought here to the United States to help create the CIA. My mother and father had met in Paris before the war. They met in this city, New York, after the war. They created a home. They spoke French. And then there were other members of my family, three in particular that I want to mention in closing. Three siblings: Emmanuel, whom we knew as Mola, Sasha, and Mila Racine. All three were roughly 20 when the war broke out. All three joined the resistance and the underground movement. Mila was tasked in Haute-Savoie in southeastern France with seeking to rescue Jewish children and take them to Switzerland. She's estimated to have taken somewhere, Danny, between 230 and 270, I think, Jewish children under the age of 16 to Switzerland. But on one mission, they also took an elderly couple, slowed them down, they were arrested, and Mila was taken to Annemasse, to the Hotel Pax, as it's now called, which was Gestapo headquarters. From there, she was sent to Ravensbrück, together with the sister of Simone Weil, Denise. From Ravensbrück, Mila was sent to Mauthausen, where Simon Wiesenthal also spent the last months of the war. And Mila was killed in March 1945. There is a plaque outside Lycée Racine, which is only a coincidental last name, Mila Racine. This was the playwright Racine. And you can see the plaque both in French and English, which honors her life. And most recently, we just learned that the City Council of Annemasse will dedicate a park in Mila's honor and memory, which is expected to open next year. Mila's spirit lives on in all of us. I'm looking at our eldest son and daughter-in-law, and they named their oldest child Mila in memory of this heroine who saved lives, but who lost her own life in the process. So, dear Philippe, dear Jeremy, dear Francois, I'm here to tell you that because of my family, I've had a lifelong relationship with France that has influenced me and affected me from head to toe. Because of the American Jewish Committee, I've been given a platform to engage with France on a daily basis through our office in Paris, led by Simone Rodin-Bezequin and Anne-Sophie Sivan, and with a direct line back to Georges Levitt, the late father of Jean-David Levitt, France's ambassador to Washington, to the UN, and diplomatic advisor to the president. I think here we have a picture of Georges Levitt as well when he worked for AJC. Thank you. This means more to me than you can imagine. Please convey my deepest appreciation to President Macron, and be assured that in myself and in the American Jewish Committee, France will always have a friend.